I'm going to give some round numbers. A $200,000 house, maybe they just bought it. You're in California, so you don't have $200,000 houses. But say you're in a part of Phoenix, we still have some $200,000 houses. But you got a $200,000 house. They owe 180. They have some motivation, right? They are getting divorced. Maybe that's their motivation. But they don't necessarily. Maybe they have 10,000 in repairs and 6% in commissions. They don't have really room to sell it, right? We just talk about converting that conversation.
Hi everybody, Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today I have one of my friends. His name is Chris Iman. He's from Collective Genius, the mastermind. And today he is going to be sharing with us what is a subject to transaction, how to take over somebody's payment. He's going to be going over that entire process. For those of you that don't know Chris, he's a wholesaler. He does about 400 plus deals a year. So somebody with obviously a lot of experience. Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
I love it. So for our viewers, Chris, who don't know who you are, obviously they know that you do a lot of volume on a yearly basis. Who is Chris Iman? And then how did you get involved in this wonderful world of real estate investing? And then after that, we can transition to the subject to model.
All right. Sounds good. I'll give you just a quick snapshot. Local to Phoenix, math major, computer science major into IT / got laid off twice in the .com crash of the late 90s. So when you get laid off twice, you're like, yo, that's no fun. I went and got my real estate license, figured out that I showed a lady a house for 4 straight weeks to have her call me on week number 5 and say, hey, you were out of town. I called off the sign. The guy opened the door. I signed the contract. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be a buyer's agent anymore. And then I got another deal where I got a listing and it sold over the first weekend. 30 days later, I got my $9,000 check, I think it was. And I'm like, I just want listings. So I knew I wasn't a sales guy coming from math and IT background. So I how can I get houses where I'm just the listing agent? So I started going to foreclosure sales in 99. Fast forward, I was fixing and flipping. This is before all the data and all the stuff and the internet or the social media. And so I was just at networking events saying, I do foreclosures. And next thing I'm a wholesaler. Next thing I'm, sending out email blasts, started a hard money company in 2003. Obviously got beat up really well in the financial crisis of 2008 and 9 because I was holding a lot of properties. I had a hard money company, had to take back some loans, took my lumps, restarted again, back at foreclosure sales, got the Goldman Sachs account for Arizona. My biggest day at trustee sale was 27 houses in one day. Average probably 15 to 20 houses a day, 20 days a month for a good few years. But I was just getting a transaction fee. I was getting $1,500. So whatever. I mean, they were paying for it. I was just doing transactions. Slow to, the foreclosure slow down. I go to direct to seller, marketing, cold calling, texting, all the fun stuff that goes on with that. And then, I'm still just a wholesaler. We did 442 transactions in 2022. We are clipping along here. And, as the market shifted in 2022, I'm like, there's a little bit of fear out there. We all know that. There's going to be less inventory. I mean, how many 3% loan people are just not going to give up their house? They're going to be like, I'm going to keep this one. And I'm going to rent it out, right? Yeah. So I just knew there was going to be less transactions. So I just started teaching my team, like, hey, there's going to be less transactions. It's going to be more difficult to just do this wholesale model. So we just have done a switch, and so we do a combination of wholesale, novations, subject to the average price of a home in Phoenix is now $500,000. 3% of that is $15,000. If they say they want to maximize their dollars, send the listing team out, list it. So, but the 442 is just wholesale deals. I mean, we still do, I've added 15. What we're here to talk about today, I've added 15
Subject twos.
creative deals to the portfolio this year. So that's a little bit. That's a little background about me.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So I think this topic is important because even me, I'm a real estate agent and I mainly focus on sellers, but most of the realtors that I notice is they only have one way to monetize something, which is they either take a listing or they don't. They don't have the wholesale way. They don't have the subject to or creative type of finance. So I think, especially in this type of market, I think the subject to is a very good model. So for our viewers that don't know what a subject to or buying a house subject to, what that means, what does that mean?
So you're taking the house subject to the mortgage, so you're leaving it in place. I'm gonna give some round numbers. A $200,000 house, maybe they just bought it. You know, you're in California, so you don't have $200,000 houses. But say you're in a part of Phoenix, we still have some $200,000 houses. But you got a $200,000 house. They owe 180. They have some motivation, right? They're getting divorced. Maybe that's their motivation. Um, but they don't necessarily. Maybe they have 10,000 in repairs and 6% in commissions. They don't have really room to sell it, right? So we just talk about converting that conversation. Well, we have a plan that we can take your house, you know, like our wholesale transaction is. I mean, a lot of people call us with their fast transaction. I want to take it in a week, take it in 10 days, right? Well, if they don't have the equity to take it in 10 days, my $200,000 house is going to get a $130,000 offer on a wholesale deal. Well, if they owe 180, I can't do anything with them. But if they have a 3% mortgage, now all of a sudden that is enticing, right? So we just converted it to, hey, one of the options here is we can take your house subject to. What that means is we take over it. You're going to leave your 3% mortgage in place. We're going to set it up at a servicing company. And then we make the payment, and then the servicing company makes the payment to your bank for you.
And
So,
then basically, so you're basically buying the property with the existing mortgage. So you take title to the property, the
yep,
existing mortgage stays under their name. So I guess my question to you is, why would somebody do something like that? Like, and I think that's the question that a lot of people ask themselves is like, would somebody actually agree to that? And I know
yeah,
the answer is yes, and it happens all the
yeah.
time. But I think for some of the viewers out there that are kind of thinking like, why would somebody do that?
Well, it's all based on their motivation, right? In the example I gave, there was kind of two things. Number one, they didn't have enough equity to even necessarily put it up for sale, because they had the 6% commission plus the repair items. So that's number one. Number two, so there's probably a motivation piece in there somewhere, that is going to make that happen. You just got to understand that they might be motivated, but they don't have enough equity for some of the other things, like even to list it, like with an agent like yourself. Um, so you don't want to. This is a tool that gets them out of their property, and still gives something good for the buyer. Although most people might listen and go like, why would I want to pay 180 for something worth 200? Well, if you have a 3% mortgage and then you sell that house on a land contract and call it 8.5, now all of a sudden you've created a 5% spread for yourself on $200,000. Well, that's $10,000 a year, $800 a month in cash flow with generally zero money out of your pocket.
And then on a land contract, you're basically not passing on the title, right, to the property.
Correct.
You're
Correct.
basically just, and I just learned that like 2 days ago because I didn't know what a land contract was or even a contract for deed. We did another interview with Austin Hancock. I think he's based out of Oklahoma City, also
Okay.
with Collective Genius. Um, Okay, so you sell it on a land contract, and then you arbitrage whatever the difference is between the 3% and the 8% mortgage,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah.
So that's a
And what's
way
great.
for you to get cash flow without having to deal with any repairs, basically.
Yeah, it's what's some people call like landlord. We call it the lien lord, right? We're just
Mhm.
monetizing the lien. We're not having the toilets, termites. They taxes don't affect us. They're all passed on. So, and what's
I
great
love it.
is you know we generally get a 10% down on these too. So you still get that active income. So 10% down on this example, 20,000 or dollars is still like is more than you would get on the commission of the home, right? So you know I get the home for 180. I do a wrap. Maybe I give them 2 grand in walking money, some money for the U-Haul and stuff like that, some closing costs. So in that example, they owed 180. Maybe I had to come 5 grand out of pocket for U-Haul money, closing costs, all that kind of stuff. But then I sell it on a land contract, and generally I can sell it for retail because I'm providing the financing with it. So somebody that I call the penalty box buyer, um, and that has a lot of people actually have money that may not have the credit to actually buy stuff. Maybe they're a business owner that just can't get their taxes done on time. That's a big part of them. So I take the 20% down and I create the cash flow. I generally have zero money in these deals. In that example, I took 20% down. This person owed 180. This person now owes me 180. I got my 20 grand down and I created $10,000 a year in cash flow.
Which is excellent without having to do any of the management. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of people think that if you're in the real estate space, you have to deal with tenants, toilets, and just the maintenance. And there's
Yeah.
different ways of doing it. What I was going to ask you is, whenever you're negotiating these types of deals, I know that you said that sometimes you just give them relocation costs like $5,000. Are there ever instances where you have to put more money out of pocket in order to take the property subject to the existing mortgage? And do you have any rules of thumbs as to what's the most that you would be able to put down, or does it just depend on the cash flow that it produces?
So there's a couple of things there. So I'm just going to take that for instance, and I'm going to back that mortgage down to say 120, right? Same $200,000 house, and their $120,000 mortgage. Now there might be some motivation there, but they don't want to take the 120. They need more than the 5 grand walking money. Maybe I can talk them into, you know, 160, for instance. Now I got to come up with $40,000 down. Now there's two pitches on that. Obviously, you can just write them the check for the 40,000, or a lot of times, and we just did one of these where the house is probably worth 700. The mortgage is 425. So there's a decent amount. This person will take 600. So there's 175 left over. They want 100 now, and they're taking 75 as a seller carry in second position at 4%. So I get the 3% mortgage of like 425 in first position. I have a second percent, and that's at 3%. I have 4%, or the 75 at 4% in second position. And I got to come up with 100 grand. Now, that's when you got to reach out to I'm a hard money lender, so we have the cash to do it. But that's when you got to reach out. If you're not a hard money lender, you got to bring in, the cash person on the side, your private money lender that maybe you split the deal with if you don't have the cash to do it.
Got it. So, how is this buying a house subject to the existing mortgage different from assuming a mortgage?
It's basically the same thing. You're just kind of wrapping it. So you're transferring the title. And so they're kind of synonyms, just like land contract and agreement for sale are synonyms. Synonym, I'm having trouble with that
The same
word.
thing, basically. They mean the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
S-
So,
Okay.
but there's a couple little tricks that you need to do. So you obviously have your insurance in place, and you have you need to talk to the mortgage company. So generally, you need a limited power of attorney that gives you the ability to talk to both the insurance company and the mortgage company. So you can direct the servicing to the servicer.
Got it. So I was told that on the assumption of a mortgage, you still have to qualify, and then on the subject to that, you don't have to qualify for it. So what's the right way? Like, because on a subject to, some of those loans are not assumable, meaning like the bank generally doesn't know most of the time that you're taking over the existing loan. Um, some of the concern that people have is that the bank can call the loan due, which is, to my knowledge, is very improbable or very low chance of that happening. What are the what's the right way of doing a subject to so that it decreases the chances of that happening? Like meaning
Yeah.
like
So yeah, so back to the first one. Yeah, you're right. Your assumption is you're qualifying it, but the only loan that I know that's assumable is the
VA.
VA loan. Yeah. So
Mm.
in which place you'd have to qualify. Um, for wrapping it, you're not having to qualify. You're just wrapping the loan. And some of the things that I would do to help prevent it being called. Obviously, there's a very little chance of it being called. But what I like to do is set up a trust. So, like it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'll set up, the Smith Trust at 123 Main Street. So now the last name, the property address, it would make sense that, the owner would transfer it into a trust with their last name. And then, good old Chris Iman's the trustee of the trust. So, something like that would definitely, and then, as you send the information to the insurance company, hey, property was transferred to the trust. And so that's definitely a way that we use to do that.
So basically, like whatever the seller's name and the address, create a trust under that name, and then making the new buyer the trustee of it, basically.
Correct. And then sending the information to the mortgagor and then the insurance company. And then, yeah, like I said, and the reason I sell the um, property on a land contract, some people teach that, hey, okay, you got the deal and now you can, take your and sell it and transfer the ownership to somebody else. The reason I like the land contract, like in Arizona, a land contract is recoverable in 31 days with less than 25% down. So it's 10% down. I can just say, hey, you're not paying me. Here's my notice. 31 days later, you're out. California, you're different. You have to go through the same process as a foreclosure in California. But if you
Mhm.
keep yourself in the middle, like I've made, obviously I think it's responsible as a real estate investor when you talk to your sellers to, you know, honor what you say you're going to do, right? So I've talked to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and I've told them that I've wrapped their mortgage and, you know, if you transfer your ownership to your new buyer and they go for a divorce, for instance, and they quit paying, obviously doesn't affect you, but it does affect the person that you agreed to take over their house with a subject to mortgage. So I like to take my ownership as a subject to, and then I sell my deal on a land contract, and then I still have the ability to foreclose that person out, take the house back over, resell it.
Yeah, and that makes it so that you're always in control of the payment as well too. That way, you're not in a bad position to the person who sold you the property. So we've got the limited power of attorney. We've got a potential trust that we can set up. H- How long does a subject to transaction take? Like, meaning, could there's no new loan, so you can close escrow what, like,
Quickly.
fast, like
Yeah.
3 days,
Yeah.
7 days, because
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your, obviously, you want to make when you're talking to somebody, everybody likes to use their escrow officer that knows how to do this, right? Because you don't want to send it to somebody that doesn't, like, what are you doing, right? You want
yeah.
to do it with somebody that has done it before. So obviously, our escrow, I use Fidelity Title. Our escrow officer at Fidelity Title knows what it's doing. So I'm like, hey, I need to send this to my girl because she knows how to process the paperwork. But yeah, it's a quick transaction. That's what I'm saying. When some of those motivated leads where there's motivated, but they're not necessarily, they can't take the wholesale price. it's a way to convert that lead that you normally couldn't convert, right?
Yeah, and it's a way to monetize it as well too. So at that point,
Yeah.
once you take over the loan, you can either decide to keep it and you be the landlord and you rent it out, or you can
Yep.
decide to sell it on a land contract. You said to process the paperwork. Like I've heard that when when the bank calls the due on sale clause, that it usually has to do with the transfer of the insurance. What's the right way of transferring insurance? Because and what's the wrong way of transferring insurance?
Well, I mean, typically we just put ourselves as additionally insured, with that limited power of attorney. So the bank's obviously on there as additionally insured, and we just add ourselves as additionally insured as well, just in case there's something that happens. And then nothing happens. We're just taking that limited power of attorney and putting ourselves on there as well.
So there's no need to create a new insurance policy. You basically keep the same insurance policy in place and just add yourselves as
Yeah.
the additionally insured.
There's some people that, like, if you we're both in collective genius. If you walk around the room, there's two different versions of the story. Um, so
Mhm.
there's some people that just say, I want my insurance company, and I just push it over there, and there's a little bit of risk of that triggering it. I haven't, like you said, it's a super low, but if you want to keep it even lower, just add yourself as additionally insured.
And the other way is to transfer the insurance company to your personal name, but that leads to an extra layer of complexity, which could trigger like the property's not insured. Oh wait, the property got transferred to a new person. But
But we're
then if the
transferring
trust
it.
is on there, it doesn't
Yeah,
really.
yeah. We're transferring it to the trust with the, like I said, I use the original last name so Mr. and Mrs. Smith at 123 Main Street. So the previous owner's name with the address. I mean, no one would know any better.
So why a trust versus an LLC?
Um, I'm not the attorney that he told me to transfer it in the trust, and I don't remember the exact process, but he just said, just stick it in a trust.
Perfect. Aside from the insurance and the transfer of the insurance, is there anything else like paper related that needs to be done to ensure that these subject to transactions are done properly?
Well, I like to get the limited power of attorney over to the servicing company as well, so that way we can get the more we can get the mortgage servicing. We can get copies of the impound accounts, all that kind of stuff as well. So we know, hey, the payments, here's the payment. Here we know where the insurance is. We know where the taxes are, but we can get copies of all those documents as well. So I just obviously give that to the obviously the escrow officer that's doing the transaction, and then I also give it to the mortgage servicer as well.
And then the limited power of attorney, at what point does that get signed? And what type of powers does that allow you to do? Does it specifically just say the escrow company, the mortgage servicing company, and insurance? Because my concern would be that if it gets done like early on in the escrow process, I'm still not the owner of the property. Does that ever raise any concern getting a limited power of attorney from the client? Or from
I
the
usually
seller? And if so,
I
how do you
usually
handle that?
I usually sign that up front, like with the contract. So to say, hey, I'm going to need to contact the. I mean, obviously, I need. We've all heard that, hey, the payoff is this, and we come back and the payoff isn't that, right? So
Yeah.
um, I want to I have that signed up front, like, hey, we're going to talk to the mortgager, the insurance company, and we're going to set up servicing, and basically that limited power attorney gives me access to all that.
Got it. I love it. Cool. Who is the avatar? Like what like are there certain lists that work better for targeting subject to mortgages? Like if somebody wanted to build a business model around this, are there certain types of situations that work out better for getting these types of leads?
Oh, for sure, the low equity list, no one's pulling it,
What
right?
does that mean? Like
Yeah, so that the like when I pull my list, I might pull an absentee owner with high equity, or tax liens with high equity, or foreclosure with high any of those lists, but how many people say, I want a list of the low equity people, the people that have almost zero money in there? And then I might go, okay, when was the 3% mortgage? The 3% mortgage was, or a 4% mortgage even. I'd take a 4% mortgage too. Mortgage rates were in this time frame, and there's not a whole lot of equity. Now, it's all going to depend on, obviously a lot of places. Phoenix saw a huge amount of growth in pricing. So a lot of people have more equity than not. We've moved back pricing a little bit, but the low equity list will definitely. But you have those people that did that, the FHAs that did 3.5. So some triggers that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't do some FHA loans that are, 1 to 2 years old. Because they just signed their documents. It said that, and they're moving in. I also wouldn't sign a subject to that had a modification agreement,
And why is that? Just out of curiosity.
because they just signed a paper that they're in dire straits and they modified their loan, and they're doing the modification and stay so that they can stay in their house, and then they sell it, move out. So
It just doesn't feel right,
yeah,
basically.
it doesn't.
What
Yeah,
what if the owner was deceased? Would you do it in that situation? Like the person that did the loan modification was now
yeah,
deceased.
yeah. It wouldn't bother me. I mean, I'd
At,
keep the loan in place as long as if I was talking to the heirs and they had the ability to sign for it. Yeah, I'd leave it in place.
no, I was saying if it was let's say they had a loan modification, but now the person is deceased now, basically, who had a loan modification.
I don't know. Once I get into a loan modification, I kind of like, there's some language in there that, saying that, you know, they're restructuring to keep their house and they're not selling and that kind of stuff. I think on a loan mod, I just stay away. I'm not 100% all the predatory areas of, loan modifications. I've just had my attorney say that, that's kind of a tricky one. I've not read those stacks of loan modification agreements that are that big, but just I've had people just say stay away from it. So anything
Got it.
that says stay away from, I'm also a licensed mortgage banker. So, I don't like to get into gray areas. I like to
Hmm.
stay away from gray areas.
Got it. Okay. And then let's talk about some challenges. Like I don't know if maybe for you or for other people in Collective Genius or other investors, what are some of the things that or have you ever heard of a loan being called due, and what was the cause, or anything negative that has happened as a result of a subject to mortgage, or things to watch out for almost?
Yeah, so it's not. I mean, I've heard of one or two being called due. If one, I do these on 150, $180,000 properties. If something came called due, once again, I'm a hard money lender. I just probably write the check, and I don't need that. I don't need the hassle. That probably doesn't work for everybody. The more the more troublesome area, and we make them sign like initial, like in 20 different places that they're agreeing to it. But just because they're agreeing to it doesn't mean that the seller is not going to have amnesia, because they have amnesia. They're just like, they agreed to something, they were getting a divorce or whatever their circumstance that brought them down that path, and it worked for them then. But now they've rebuilt their beautiful life and they have a mortgage and they're married and they want to buy a new house, right? So they have amnesia about all the conversations that they had. And they'll have the signatures right there that said, we are leaving your mortgage in place. Initial here, right? All that stuff. And, they're still complaining. So that's your biggest complaint.
Sometimes sellers, well, what I've heard is that they agree to it because of the situation that they're in, but then as their situation gets better, sometimes that their way of thinking changes now, and now
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't want this under my name. So that leads to my next question. Let's say that let's say that they have 27 years left on their loan. Do you usually structure the subject to for a certain amount of time, like saying like, okay, we're going to keep the loan in place for 7 years, 10 years, or do you usually structure it where you're keeping the loan in place for all 27 remaining years?
I would say I've done both, but yes, my goal for when I sell it on a land contract is to typically that person moves in 5 to 7 years. That's the average for Phoenix. What, 5 to 7 years? So that person would generally then move, and then that's going to trigger the payoff from the first to pay off me because I might have some equity in the deal, and then generally I move on.
Got it. What are some of the most frequently asked questions by sellers in these types of situations? Like, so for example, I'm a seller. Like, I imagine one of the things that would come up would be, am I able to qualify for another loan? And do you know the answer to that? And what are some of the other questions and maybe answers of things that come up?
Yeah, so typically the answer is yes. That's one of them, and I say yes. Like, and I use an example, and I tell I'm not actually the person at the door,
Hmm.
but like for instance, my office building was a residential house. It was on a busy street, and then
Hmm.
I converted it to residential office. So now my mortgage is in place as an uh, residential, but my business pays it. And I show that I actually show the letter. I'll let my acquisition guys go, like, here's my boss's loan on his business building. He bought his residential house, he converted it, but here's a letter that he gets from the company every single time that when I want to go personally buy a house myself with my own credit, that I submit to the mortgage company. And so I have an example right there in my company that's like, and my and they don't get I don't get dinged on the debt to income ratio. So actually, we use myself as an example. Here's a business building that has a residential loan on it. My boss owns it, and it he doesn't get dinged on the payment because he can show 12 months of payments being paid. And that's what's great about the servicer. That person wants to go down the road and get a loan. They called the servicer that we set up at the original transactions, and they can get a copy of all the checks that they submit to the mortgage company.
And I've heard that that's the key to make sure that you have a mortgage servicer, because if they have that, the new lender can use that to help the old buy or the old seller qualify for that. Are there any servicers that you would recommend that are better than others, and certain servicers that maybe we should stay away from?
I just use Magnus Title in Phoenix.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, I've known them for a while. I've been in business from Phoenix for a while. So, but I'm sure there's, a bunch of national servicers out there. I mean,
That would do it.
Magnus is just a local title company that has a servicing company um, in place, and I deal with their escrow officer a lot. So I just use them.
Yeah. What other questions do sellers ask in these types of situations? Like, what's the biggest concerns for sellers?
Obviously, once again, it's um, is the mortgage going to get paid? And then I'm like, that's why we set up servicing. Is the Can I still qualify for another? Yep. You just reach out to the servicing company, and they're going to have the transactions of the last 12, 14, 24 months, whatever your loan officer asks for. Um, Obviously, they're like, what happens to the house? You know, what happens if someone damages the house? Well, I own the house. I'm an investor. I'm going to re-repair it and rent it out again. So,
Hmm.
obviously, we're a good sized company in Phoenix and with over 20 years in business. So that helps with those conversations probably a little bit more than it does for somebody
Hmm.
that's just new to this. But obviously, we leverage the fact that we've been in business for a while and said, you know, and it's part of the conversation. Generally, it's something that they don't really have a choice about. There's
Yeah.
motivation there, but they don't maybe have the equity to even list it because they don't have enough for the broker fees and the repairs.
Got it. I love it. Okay. Uh, this goes back to the trust thing, and this is just for my head because I've never done a subject to transaction, but I may have an opportunity right now to do it, and I'm just kind of thinking like, oh, this is a way to actually grow a real estate portfolio, and it's also a way for helping certain people in need. Does that mean that if you buy 20 subject twos, you'd probably have like 20 different trusts, basically,
Yeah, um,
potentially?
yeah, potentially, yeah.
Doesn't make a
But
difference.
yeah, it's like
Doesn't.
$1,000 to set up or something. I don't even. I just send it to my attorney and send me the bill.
Got it. I love it.
But I'm
Cool.
getting these. I'm creating cash flow with no money out of my pocket generally.
Hmm.
I'm doing. I have a couple of the subject twos. I've actually figured out that there's I have relationships with business banks, and I'm creating my own mortgages, and then doing some seller financing to my penalty box buyers. But in this model, I've done 15 of these this year, and I've generated, I don't know the exact number, somewhere between 10 to 12,000 in cash flow, and added $1 million to the balance sheet with almost no money.
Which is excellent, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get my cash flow, and sometime in the next 5, 7, 10 years, I'm gonna get paid $1 million, and I got no money in the deal.
I
And I'm gonna
love it.
do. I did 15, and my goal is to do 100. So it's like,
I love it. Cool. Anything else as it relates to subject to transactions that you think would be valuable or that somebody should know if they're considering doing a subject to?
yeah. So I'm actually in the process of setting up a fund for these. Just to so if anybody wants to maybe potentially wholesale these, or they get these come across their desk, you can definitely reach out, because I'd pay a finder's fee or a wholesale fee to pay for these. But I'm setting up a fund, and the fund is going to buy these, leave the subject to in place, put that down payment like we talked about, could be 30, 40, 50 grand. Um, and then take a piece of the fund, and then get people to invest in the fund. And um, I'm in the process of doing it right now, just to add more of these to the portfolio.
I love it. I love it. Good. And then if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, Chris, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on obviously Facebook and Instagram at just Chris Iman. My last name's Iman, so it's not it's one of the few last names there's not a lot of us out there. So and yeah, or you can reach me at Chris at Sell Wholesale Houses, which is my just wholesale company.
Got it. I love it. Good. All right. Well, Chris, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the show. This is a topic that we had not covered, but I know that with the marketplace interest rates being at 7%, it's a topic that is very lucrative right now. And a lot of people are asking questions about it. So I did want to say thank you. For our viewers out there, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this episode will be helpful to any friends, family, neighbors, make sure to hit that share button. Once again, thank you, Chris, and to our viewers, until next time.